I know you are ready for a new story, but tonight we are going to dive into a different tale than the usual stories. This one is drenched in reluctance and duty, where power was a burden carried like chains, where a man's desire for solitude clashed violently with an empire's demand for leadership. However, I promise this isn't another story. It's a journey into the mind of a man who never wanted the throne he sat upon, a descent into the golden cage that was the palace of the Caesars, where every comfort was a mockery of the freedom he craved, and every honor a new weight upon his shoulders. I want to tell you about a time when Rome transitioned from republic to empire, when power passed from the many to the few, and finally to one man alone. An era when ambition was both virtue and vice, when men spoke of duty to Rome while clutching daggers behind their backs, when the greatest power in the world rested in hands that wished to be empty. From the shadow of greatness emerged a name forever linked to reluctant rule: Tiberius. But who exactly was Tiberius? The soldier who became emperor yet never ceased longing for exile. The man who commanded legions with brilliance yet found himself commanded by history's cruel whims. I challenge you to imagine being born into power's shadow, raised by a mother whose ambition knew no bounds, adopted by the most powerful man in the world, and then finding yourself ruler of an empire spanning 3 continents. All while your heart yearned only for a quiet villa by the sea and the company of books. Are you ready to bear with me as we uncover how a brilliant general became a reluctant emperor? How the stepson of Augustus came to rule the world he wished to escape? And how the man who preferred exile on a lonely island became the second emperor of Rome? Discover how Tiberius, heir to Augustus, ascended to Rome's throne with a heart heavy as stone. A brilliant general who commanded legions with mastery, yet dreaded the purple robes of imperial power. His story isn't one of conquest, but of reluctance, a man who saw the golden throne as a gilded cage, who understood that ultimate power meant ultimate sacrifice. I promise this tale of Tiberius reveals the hidden face of power, the crushing weight behind the gleaming facade. His private writings expose a man trapped between duty and desire, between the empire he inherited and the life he craved. Tonight you'll understand why history's judgment of Rome's second emperor deserves a second look. Now, relax in a comfortable position. Our stories don't require you to watch the video. They are narrated to guide you on a relaxing journey to fall asleep as you listen. Feel your body relaxing, your shoulders, your hips. A warm feeling slowly relaxes your entire body from head to toe, as if you are entering a warm bath of soothing water. Your body begins to relax as the water slowly rises from your feet to your legs, your torso, your shoulders. You feel every single muscle becoming more and more relaxed. Feel the comfort of this moment. Focus on the story and allow the narrative to gently lead you toward a comfortable sleep. And now, let the world of our heroes begin. I never wanted the throne. That is the first truth you should know about me. I, Tiberius Claudius Nero, adopted son of Augustus, would have given all the gold in Rome's treasury to remain a general in the field. There, at least, I understood my purpose. There, I knew who I was. The day Augustus summoned me to discuss succession, I felt not pride, but dread, like a man watching storm clouds gather over the only path home. My military campaigns had earned me glory. In Germania, Pannonia, and Illyricum, I led Rome's legions to victory after victory. The soldiers respected me. I lived simply among them, sharing their hardships. But Augustus saw something else in me, a successor who understood duty above all. How bitter that my greatest virtue would become my heaviest chain. When I protested, he reminded me that Rome needed stability more than it needed my happiness. I retreated to Rhodes for years, hoping Augustus would find another heir. Those were my happiest days, studying philosophy, living as a private citizen. I walked among ordinary people, unburdened by the weight of Rome. But destiny, that cruelest of masters, would not release me. When Augustus's grandsons died, his summons came again. I returned to Rome knowing I was walking into a gilded prison from which only death would free me. I was born Tiberius Claudius Nero in the year 42 BCE, when Rome still bled from Caesar's murder. The Claudian line flowed in my veins, ancient, noble blood that carried with it expectations heavier than the golden busts of my ancestors. My father, the elder Tiberius Claudius Nero, stood proud among Mark Antony's supporters, a choice that would soon cast shadows over my earliest days. My mother, Livia Drusilla, was no ordinary woman. Even in my earliest memories, her eyes held calculation beyond mere maternal concern. She was beauty carved from marble, cold, perfect, and unyielding. When others spoke of love in families, I remained silent. I understood duty before I knew tenderness. Politics entered my life before I could form words to reject it. Civil war marked my infancy. Before I could walk steadily, we fled Rome, my father having chosen the losing side when Octavian and Antony's alliance fractured. I remember the hurried footsteps, the whispered fears, the sensation of being carried through darkness. Not even 3 years old, and already I was a fugitive from the man who would later become my stepfather. We wandered. Sicily, Greece, wherever safety could be purchased or allies found. The uncertainty of those years seeped into my bones like winter cold. I learned to watch faces for signs of danger before I learned to read. My father taught me that a Claudian never shows weakness, even as we lived at the mercy of others. Pride was our inheritance when fortune abandoned us. The ancient virtues were beaten into me like bronze shaped under a hammer. Duty, honor, sacrifice for the state. My tutors spoke of them even as we lived in exile. "Remember who you are," my father would say, gripping my shoulders. Not for love did he demand excellence, but for the restoration of our family's position. I was a vessel for ambition before I was a child. When peace finally came and amnesty allowed our return to Rome, my mother made her choice. She divorced my father to marry Octavian, soon to be Augustus, Emperor of Rome. I was not yet 5 when I watched her transform our family's fate through political marriage. Even then I understood in Rome, love bows to advantage, and children are but pieces on the board of power. My mother, Livia Drusilla, was not like other mothers. When I was barely 3 years old, she divorced my father and married Octavian, the man who would become Emperor Augustus. I remember little of that day, but I recall the confusion in my father's eyes as he bid me farewell. Only later did I understand this was no mere marriage, but a calculated alliance that would forever alter my destiny. I was thrust into the household of the man who had been my father's enemy. The servants whispered when they thought I couldn't hear, calling it a masterful political maneuver. To me, It was simply betrayal. Mother's eyes, once warm when they fell upon me, now constantly darted about the room, assessing threats, opportunities, and allegiances with calculating precision. Mother's influence over Augustus was extraordinary. While other women managed households, Livia managed Rome itself from behind a curtain of proper Roman virtue. Power wears many faces, Tiberius, she once told me as we watched Augustus address the Senate from a distance. The loudest voice isn't always the strongest. Her own voice was never loud, yet somehow always heard. I was but a piece on her political game board, advanced strategically toward greater positions. When I was 9, she arranged for me to deliver the funeral oration for my father, not out of respect for him, but to display my oratorical promise to Rome. As I spoke the carefully rehearsed words, I caught her approving nod. Not pride in my grief, but satisfaction in my performance. As I grew older, I came to admire her brilliance, even as I resented being her pawn. When she maneuvered my adoption into the Julian line, securing my place in the imperial succession, I understood the magnitude of her achievement. She had transformed herself from a refugee of civil war into the most powerful woman in Rome, and me from the son of a defeated rival into Caesar's heir. Yet for all her machinations, I never felt truly loved for myself alone. Rome needs a steady hand, not a gentle one, she would say when I questioned her methods. Perhaps she did love me in her way, a love inseparable from ambition. This lesson shaped me more than any other in Rome. Even a mother's love comes with conditions, and affection is merely another form of currency in the endless transaction of power. Augustus's shadow stretched longer than the marble columns of his palace. I lived beneath it, a stepson perpetually measuring my worth against a legend. The imperial household gleamed with opulence, gold-leafed ceilings, exotic slaves from distant provinces, and endless ceremonies. Yet beneath this splendor lay rigid discipline. My days were structured by tutors and expectations, never allowed to forget whose household I inhabited. My education was impeccable. Rhetoric, philosophy, military strategy, all befitting a Roman of noble birth. Yet while other boys studied to serve the Republic, I watched that Republic dissolve before my eyes. Augustus, ever careful with appearances, maintained the facade of traditional governance while gathering all true power to himself. I learned 2 lessons: the official history and the truth behind it. I remember my first military review. 16 years old, standing beside Augustus as he inspected the Praetorian Guard. "Stand straighter," he whispered, his smile never faltering for the watching crowd. A future leader must appear confident even when he isn't. His hand rested briefly on my shoulder, a public display of favor that felt like a vice. I learned to wear masks that day. Augustus favored blood over adoption. I saw it in his eyes when he looked at Germanicus, my nephew by birth but brother through adoption. The way Augustus's face would soften, how his laughter came more freely. For me there were approving nods when I succeeded, silence when I failed. I existed as insurance, the backup plan should his bloodline falter. This knowledge burned like slow poison. In public, I was the dutiful stepson. I commanded armies, won victories, expanded borders, all in Augustus's name. Each triumph was dedicated to him, each conquest added to his glory. Meanwhile, I studied his methods with growing comprehension. How he balanced generosity with fear, tradition with innovation. I learned statecraft from the master himself, though he never knew how closely I observed. The greatest irony. As I grew to resent the golden cage of imperial favor, I also became its product. My speech, my thoughts, my very bearing were shaped by Augustus's court. I learned to hide my true feelings behind careful words, to see 3 moves ahead in every conversation. When I looked in polished bronze mirrors, I sometimes glimpsed his calculating eyes staring back from my own face. The military tribune's cloak felt heavier than any toga I'd ever worn, but I welcomed its weight. In 20 BCE, I escaped Rome's venomous whispers for Cantabria's mountain passes. There, among men who cared only for competence, I found my first true breaths of freedom. The legion became my sanctuary, each order given and followed a simple truth after years of courtly lies. In Armenia's bitter cold, I learned command is earned, not granted. My men followed me not because of my name, but because I shared their hardships. I slept on frozen ground, ate their meager rations, and led from the front. When we were ambushed in a narrow valley, I grabbed a standard about to fall and rallied the cohort. That night, veterans who'd sneered at my youth nodded with respect. The diplomatic mission to Parthia tested me more than any battle. Augustus wanted the standards lost by Crassus returned, a humiliation that had stained Rome for decades. I negotiated for weeks, balancing threats with respect, never revealing our emperor's desperation. When I finally stood watching those golden eagles return to Roman hands, even my stepfather's praise seemed genuine. For once, I'd succeeded on my own terms. Battle clarified everything. In the chaos of clashing steel and shouted commands, I discovered my mind worked with unusual precision. While others panicked, time seemed too slow for me. I could see patterns in enemy movements, weaknesses in their lines. My greatest victory came after 3 sleepless days tracking Germanic raiders. We caught them at a river crossing, my carefully positioned archers and cavalry executing a perfect envelopment. Around campaign fires, I found camaraderie I'd never known in Rome. Men spoke freely, without the double meanings and hidden daggers of the Senate. A grizzled centurion once told me, "You're not what we expected, Commander. You listen." I treasured those words more than any Senate accolade. These soldiers judged me by my actions alone, how I planned, how I fought, how I treated them. For the first time, I felt truly seen. Those years in the field forged me into someone I respected. I learned to value directness over politics, loyalty over advantage. Yet even as I celebrated each victory, a shadow loomed. Augustus's letters grew more frequent, filled with talk of succession and my duties to Rome. I knew my days of relative freedom were numbered. The empire would eventually call me back to its suffocating embrace, away from the only place I'd ever truly belonged. They called it a union of noble houses, but to me it was simply another imperial command. At 22, I was ordered to marry Vipsania Agrippina, the daughter of Marcus Agrippa, Augustus's most trusted general and friend. I expected nothing but duty and cold formality. Yet fate played a curious trick. In this arrangement designed purely for political advantage, I discovered something I never thought possible in Rome's calculating society: genuine affection. Vipsania possessed a gentle wisdom that soothed my restless mind. Unlike the scheming nobility that infested the imperial court, she spoke with honesty and listened with genuine interest. In our private chambers, away from prying eyes, we built something precious. I found myself sharing thoughts I'd never dared voice to another soul. When our son Drusus was born, I felt a completeness I never imagined possible for a man of my temperament. For 7 years, I knew contentment. Then Augustus summoned me to his private study. His expression revealed nothing as he delivered the blow that would shatter my world. I was to divorce Vipsania immediately and marry his daughter Julia, recently widowed by Agrippa's death. My protests died on my lips when I saw the steel behind his eyes. The princeps had spoken. My marriage, my happiness, my very heart, all were simply pieces on Augustus's political game board. The day I pronounced the divorce formula to Vipsania remains burned into my memory. Her face betrayed no emotion. She had been raised in politics and understood its cruel necessities. It was I who nearly broke. I who had to turn away lest the court see my weakness. Months later, I glimpsed her in the forum. Without thought, I followed her, tears streaming down my face until my attendants guided me away. Augustus, upon hearing of this incident, ensured we would never cross paths again. Julia was everything Vipsania was not. Beautiful, yes, but vain and reckless. Where Vipsania brought peace, Julia brought chaos. She made no secret of her contempt for me, nor I of my resentment toward her. In public, we performed our roles perfectly. In private, silence reigned, broken only by bitter arguments. When rumors of her infidelities reached me, I felt nothing but a dull confirmation of what I already knew. This marriage was a prison sentence for us both. Each night as I lay beside a woman I could not love, I silently cursed Augustus for his cruelty disguised as statecraft. The man who preached family values had destroyed mine without hesitation. This lesson was not lost on me in Rome. Even love is subject to imperial decree. Perhaps this is when the darkness truly began to take root in me, when I learned that happiness was a luxury no Roman statesman could afford, least of all the heir to Augustus's power. Germania's wilderness tested every fiber of my being. The endless forests stretched like a green sea before our legions, dark, foreboding, and filled with hidden dangers. The natives knew every trail and stream, while we Romans struggled through unfamiliar terrain, our armor heavy in the damp air. I ordered scouts to map the land ahead, knowing that in such territory, knowledge was as valuable as steel. The barbarians believed their forests would protect them. I was determined to prove them wrong. The Germanic tribes fought with savage ferocity. Unlike our disciplined formations, they emerged from the mists with terrifying war cries, their bodies painted and their weapons crude but deadly. At the Battle of Arbalo, they ambushed our supply lines, but I had anticipated this. I ordered a tactical retreat, drawing them into open ground where our superior training prevailed. We slaughtered thousands that day, and I watched their chieftain kneel before me, offering his sword in submission. My brother Drusus and I campaigned as one mind in two bodies. Where I was methodical, he was bold. Where I was stern, he inspired love. Together we extended Rome's reach to the mighty Elbe River, a feat many thought impossible. We established winter camps and fortifications, gradually transforming wild lands into provinces worthy of Rome. The Senate awarded us triumphs, but the true victory was in our brotherhood, forged stronger in the blood and mud of Germania. Then came the darkest day. Word reached me that Drusus had fallen from his horse. I rode for days without rest to reach him, but arrived only to cradle my dying brother in my arms. His last words were of Rome and glory. The pain that gripped me was beyond anything I had known in battle. I carried his body back to Rome myself, walking the entire way from the Rhine. Augustus wept. The people mourned, but none felt the loss as I did. A part of me died with Drusus in that distant land. I found clarity and command that eluded me in Rome. In the field, my orders meant life or death. My strategies determined victory or defeat. There was honesty in this that contrasted sharply with the political games of the capital and the farce of my marriage to Julia. Each night in my tent, planning the next day's march, I felt more myself than in all the marble halls of Rome. The men respected me not for my name, but for my ability to keep them alive. The irony was not lost on me. With each territory I conquered for Augustus, I became more essential to his plans, yet more distant from his circle. The Senate hailed me as Rome's greatest general after pacifying the tribes between the Rhine and Elbe. I had given Rome new provinces, new resources, new glory, yet I felt no joy in these accomplishments. I had become the sword of Rome, sharp and necessary, but ultimately just a tool in the hands of the emperor, to be wielded or set aside at his pleasure. Rhodes became my sanctuary when I could bear Rome no longer. I abandoned everything at the peak of my success: military commands, political office, Rome itself. The scandal of Julia's affairs had become unbearable. My own wife, flaunting herself with countless lovers while I was expected to maintain dignity. Augustus feigned shock, but I knew better. The final wound was watching him parade his grandsons Gaius and Lucius as his true heirs. I chose a modest villa overlooking the sea. No grand processions, no sycophants seeking favors, no endless political maneuvering. I dismissed most of my attendants, keeping only those I trusted implicitly. My days filled with philosophy, the Stoics became my companions. At night, I studied the stars, finding patterns more reliable than human loyalty. For the first time in years, I could breathe without the weight of Rome crushing my chest. The peace didn't last. Whispers reached me even in exile. In Rome, they called my retreat an act of defiance, a political statement against Augustus himself. Merchants arriving from Italy watched me with suspicious eyes. Local officials who once welcomed me grew distant. I realized my attempt to escape politics had become its own political act. My isolation, meant as surrender, was interpreted as threat. Augustus's response was worse than I imagined. He publicly declared I had abandoned my duties, my family, Rome itself. Letters ceased. My name became unmentionable in the imperial palace. What began as voluntary exile transformed into imprisonment. Rhodes, once my haven, became my cage. I was neither citizen nor prisoner, neither Roman official nor truly private man. I existed in a void of Augustus's making. 4 years stretched to 6, then 8. I grew a beard. My skin weathered under the Rhodian sun. I watched Roman ships arrive and depart, carrying news I wasn't permitted to hear. When word came of Gaius Caesar's death, followed by Lucius's, I felt nothing but hollow vindication. Augustus had gambled everything on those boys, and now they were gone. I knew what would come next. I was the last resort, the unwanted necessity. The summons finally came. I would return to Rome, but only after humiliating myself with pleas and petitions. Augustus granted permission with calculated reluctance. As I prepared to leave Rhodes, I looked back at my simple villa one last time. This exile had taught me lessons I would never forget. Power, once surrendered, exacts a terrible price for its return. I sailed for Rome a different man, harder, warier, and with a debt to repay. Fate has a curious way of mocking our plans. After years of exile, I found myself living in seclusion upon my return to Rome in 2 CE. I dwelled in a modest home on the Esquiline Hill, avoiding the Forum and Senate House. Political obscurity suited me well enough. The whispers still followed. Tiberius, the disgraced, the abandoned, the forgotten. I took comfort in anonymity, believing my days of public service had ended. Then Lucius Caesar died. Augustus's golden boy, his chosen heir, struck down by illness in Massilia. I felt the city's mood shift. Eyes turned toward me again. When Gaius followed his brother to the underworld 2 years later, dying of wounds in Lycia, I knew my peaceful retirement had ended. The gods had cleared my path to power with ruthless efficiency. Or perhaps it was not the gods at all. My mother visited frequently during those days. Livia spoke of destiny and duty, her eyes gleaming with ambition, poorly disguised as maternal pride. "Augustus needs you now," she insisted. I wondered then, as I still do, whether her hands had somehow guided these convenient deaths. She dismissed my questions with practiced offense. "The gods have spoken," she said. Perhaps her gods had names like poison and conspiracy. The adoption ceremony in 4 CE felt like both coronation and condemnation. Augustus, that master of political theater, made his intentions perfectly clear. He adopted me as his son with one hand, while forcing me to adopt my nephew Germanicus with the other. My own son Drusus stood aside, passed over. The message required no interpretation. I was to be merely the bridge between Augustus and the popular Germanicus. I accepted this arrangement with the stoicism expected of a Roman. What choice did I have? Exile had taught me the bitter lesson of powerlessness. In private, I raged at being treated as a placeholder, a reluctant caretaker of Augustus's legacy until his true chosen one could take the reins. Yet duty has always been my master, even when it came dressed as humiliation. And so I returned to public life, commanding armies again, administering provinces. The Senate that had once shunned me now fawned over the heir apparent. How quickly they forgot their contempt. I watched them carefully, noting every face that had smiled at my disgrace, now beaming with false friendship. The path to power was opening before me, paved with the stones of personal humiliation. I would remember each slight when my time came. When Augustus adopted me in 4 CE, I found myself thrust back into military life, a realm where I had always excelled. The northern frontiers needed securing, and my adoptive father knew I was the man for this task. Returning to command felt like slipping on a well-worn toga, the weight familiar, the purpose clear. After years adrift in political uncertainty, the battlefield offered me something politics never could: honest clarity. The Illyrian and Pannonian campaigns tested every fiber of my military acumen. Those tribes fought with desperate ferocity, yet my legions responded with disciplined Roman might. I drove my men hard but fairly, sharing their hardships, eating their rations. At night, I would walk among the tents, listening. A commander who doesn't know his men's whispers cannot hope to command their swords when dawn breaks. By 9 CE, I had pacified much of the northern frontier through careful strategy rather than needless bloodshed. Then came the news that shattered Rome's confidence. Varus had lost 3 entire legions in Germania's dark forests. I still recall the messenger's ashen face as he delivered the report. 20,000 Romans slaughtered. The eagles captured. Augustus collapsed into grief, while I prepared for war once more. I found Augustus wandering the palace halls at night, crying out, "Quintilius Varus, give me back my legions." While he mourned, I planned. Sentiment would not secure our borders. Only strategic thinking would. I dispatched scouts, repositioned forces, and strengthened our Rhine defenses. Rome needed pragmatism, not lamentation. The German tribes had shown us the limits of our reach, and I would not forget that lesson. The Rhine became our true frontier, a line I would not cross without purpose. Some called this cowardice. I called it wisdom. Why sacrifice more Roman lives for forests and bogs that offered Rome little? I secured what we could hold, abandoning what we could not. My legionaries respected this approach. They knew I valued their lives above empty glory. In the camps, they began calling me the Shield of Rome. As I cemented Rome's northern defenses, I felt Augustus's approving gaze from afar. My military successes were bringing me closer to the purple robes I never sought. The irony was not lost on me. My competence was ensuring my succession. Yet, on the battlefield, such concerns seemed distant. There, I was simply Tiberius, the commander, not Tiberius, the reluctant heir. Perhaps that is why I lingered on campaign as long as I did. Augustus's final years weighed heavily upon Rome. I watched him shrink before my eyes, his once commanding frame bent by age, yet his mind remained sharp as a gladius. He summoned me often, his voice weaker, but his demands no less exacting. "Tiberius," he would rasp, "the Germanic tribes grow restless again." Even as death's shadow lengthened across him, he clutched the empire's reins with bony fingers, unwilling to loosen his grip. 50 years I had lived in his shadow, first as his stepson, then as his general, finally as his reluctant heir. I respected his achievements. Who could not? He had transformed a republic into an empire without most Romans even noticing the change. Yet bitterness lingered in my heart for the years of exile, for Agrippa always favored before me, for the way he had forced me to divorce my beloved Vipsania. My mother Livia hovered over Augustus like a hawk, controlling who saw him, what medicines he took, what news reached his ears. "The empire needs stability, Tiberius," she whispered when we were alone. "You must be ready." I saw how she positioned herself between Augustus and all others, even his daughter Julia. Did she merely protect him in his vulnerability, or was she ensuring my path to power? I never asked the question aloud. In the summer of his 76th year, Augustus insisted on traveling to Campania despite his failing health. I accompanied him part way before he sent me to Illyricum on military business. The message reached me there. Augustus was dying at Nola. I rode day and night, changing horses until they nearly collapsed beneath me. Was it my duty that drove me so hard, or fear of what would happen if I failed to reach him? I arrived too late, or so they told me. Augustus had already breathed his last, though his body was still warm when I entered his chamber. My mother stood beside the bed, composed as always. "He asked for you," she said. His last thoughts were of Rome's future. Later, whispers reached me that Livia had hastened his end with poisoned figs, once she knew I was close enough to secure the succession. I never sought to confirm these rumors. As Augustus's body was prepared for its journey back to Rome, I stood alone at the window, the weight of the empire descending upon my shoulders like a bronze statue. I had never wanted this power. My thoughts turned to Rhodes, to the peaceful years of my exile, studying astronomy and swimming in clear waters. Now the purple awaited me, and with it the Senate's false smiles, the endless petitions, the conspiracies. Augustus had been born for this. I was merely the reluctant inheritor of his impossible legacy. Augustus's death came like a thunderclap in the summer of 14 CE. Though I had long been positioned as his successor, I felt no triumph that day, only a crushing weight upon my shoulders. The empire stretched before me like a vast, treacherous sea, and I, never comfortable at the helm, was suddenly its reluctant captain. I had spent decades commanding armies, yet the thought of commanding Rome itself filled me with profound unease. The first Senate meeting after Augustus's passing was a performance I detested. I spoke of the burden being too great for any one man, a truth, not mere theater. Yet the senators saw only calculation in my reluctance. They competed to prostrate themselves before me, these men who once governed our republic. Their servility disgusted me more than any battlefield carnage I had witnessed. Where was their Roman dignity? I delivered Augustus's eulogy with measured words. How strange to honor the man who had both elevated and imprisoned me in the same golden cage. As I spoke, I watched the crowd for signs of dissent, for whispers of Germanicus's name. My nephew, beloved by the people in ways I never was. I knew they wished for his youthful vigor rather than my 55 years of caution and experience. The deification of Augustus, another charade I was forced to orchestrate. I arranged for a senator to swear he had seen Augustus's spirit ascending to heaven. The masses needed their gods, even as I privately questioned such matters. Politics demanded divinity, and so my predecessor became divine while I, his mortal successor, would forever labor in the shadow of a god. How long will you continue to compare me to him? I once snapped at a senator who praised me by saying I was nearly as wise as Augustus. The man blanched white as marble. I had spoken my mind, a dangerous habit for an emperor. Augustus had mastered the art of appearing accessible while maintaining absolute control. I possessed neither his charm nor his patience for pretense. Power I never fully desired now rested in my hands alone. The Principate, Augustus's clever fiction of a restored republic, required maintenance of elaborate illusions. I found myself surrounded by men I couldn't trust, wielding authority I didn't entirely want. Yet abandon it I could not. Rome needed governance, and I had sworn to provide it. The actor had reluctantly taken the stage. The performance had begun. The ink had barely dried on Augustus's will when my first crisis erupted. Mutinies broke out among the legions in Pannonia and along the Rhine. The soldiers, emboldened by the transition of power, demanded better pay, shorter service, and improved conditions. I received the news with dread. 25 years of military command had taught me that nothing threatens an empire more than its own discontented army. I dispatched my son Drusus to Pannonia and Germanicus to the Rhine. My nephew, ever the people's darling, took an approach that gnawed at my patience. He offered the soldiers money from his own purse and allowed them to execute their officers. Such populist gestures undermined proper discipline, yet I could not deny their effectiveness. The mutiny calmed, though at a price I found troubling. Each night I paced my chambers, calculating the threat. These mutinies revealed how tenuous an emperor's control truly is. The legions that raise a man to power can just as easily destroy him. I had seen it before. Generals elevated by their troops, then discarded when they failed to satisfy their demands. Augustus had carefully cultivated the army's loyalty for decades. I had mere months to secure it. What troubled me most was Germanicus's growing popularity. The troops adored him in a way they never would me. I saw how the soldiers cheered him, how the Senate praised his resolution of the crisis. Each accolade for my nephew diminished my own authority. I recognized the potential threat he posed, not through any malice of his own, but through the dangerous affection he inspired. I made the necessary concessions while preserving what discipline I could. The soldiers received some of their demands, increased pay and limited service terms, but I ensured the ringleaders were quietly punished once order was restored. Balance, always balance. Too harsh and risk further rebellion. Too lenient and invite contempt. This was the cold arithmetic of rule that Augustus had taught me. The mutinies reinforced what I had long suspected. Power rests on the edge of a blade. I resolved then to maintain tighter control over military appointments and movements. No commander would again have such autonomy as Germanicus had taken. The lesson was clear: an emperor who cannot command his armies commands nothing at all. This crisis shaped my approach to power for the years that followed. They called him Rome's golden son, my nephew and adopted heir Germanicus. I watched him charm the Senate with effortless grace while I struggled through each address. The legions adored him. The people worshipped him. His very name evoked Augustus, while mine remained forever in shadow. I recognized his talents, his quick mind, his natural leadership, yet each praise of him felt like an indictment of me. After the Varian disaster, I sent Germanicus to restore Rome's honor in the forests of Germania. He recovered our lost eagles with admirable skill, yet pursued glory at the expense of prudence. Each victory dispatch from the Rhine filled me with conflicting emotions: pride in Rome's resurgence, concern for his reckless advances beyond the river, and yes, a shameful twinge of envy at the Senate's rapturous reception of his exploits. I recalled him from Germania, not from jealousy, as his supporters whispered, but from strategic necessity. Our empire stretched too thin. Further conquest of those endless forests would drain our treasury and spill precious Roman blood. I reassigned him to the east, where his diplomatic talents could better serve Rome. He received the appointment with a gracious smile that never reached his eyes. His wife Agrippina proved the greater threat. Augustus's granddaughter, who never let anyone forget her lineage. She paraded their children before the public like royal heirs, positioning her family against mine. When reports arrived of Germanicus countermanding my orders in Syria, I wondered, was he merely impetuous or deliberately undermining my authority? The distance between us grew with every dispatch from the east. The news of his death in Antioch struck Rome like a thunderbolt. "Poison!" they cried, pointing fingers at my loyal Piso, or, God's help me, at myself. I mourned my sister's son in private while the city erupted in grief. Each tear I shed in public was scrutinized for authenticity. Each moment of composure condemned as evidence of guilt. How could I win against such perceptions? In death, Germanicus became more dangerous than in life. A perfect hero, unspoiled by time, forever young and virtuous in memory. His family transformed into living martyrs, their every grievance against me sanctified by his ghost. I had lost not just a nephew and heir, but any hope of escaping comparison. The Golden Prince would forever outshine the reluctant emperor who lived to face Rome's harsh realities. The trial of Gnaeus Calpurnius. Piso haunts me still. When news of Germanicus's death reached Rome, the mob howled for vengeance, and all eyes turned to me. They whispered I had orchestrated my nephew's demise through Piso, my appointed governor of Syria. I found myself trapped between truth and perception, between justice and appeasement. The Senate demanded blood, while I alone bore the burden of ensuring a fair proceeding. I crafted my public statements with excruciating care. Let the evidence speak, I told them, not passion or prejudice. But who could hear reason amid such clamor? Agrippina paraded Germanicus's children before the crowds, their tears fueling public fury. The people adored her theatrical grief, while questioning my measured response. Did my composure betray guilt? No, it reflected my duty to uphold the law, even as my own family demanded I abandon it. Privately, I doubted Piso's guilt. The evidence seemed circumstantial, the accusations convenient. Germanicus was beloved. Someone had to pay for his death. I wrote in my personal notes, "We sacrifice one man to preserve the peace." How bitter those words taste now. I recognized the political necessity, even as I despised it. The trial proceeded like a play where everyone knew the ending before the first act began. Then came Piso's suicide. They found him in his chamber, blood pooled beneath his opened veins, a final letter proclaiming his innocence yet accepting his fate. The mob celebrated as if this confirmed his guilt. I knew better. He died because he saw no path to justice, no chance of fair judgment in a court inflamed by grief and suspicion. His death brought not closure, but deeper questions that would never be answered. That trial taught me the worthlessness of truth against the power of perception. No matter my actions, rumors persisted. If I showed emotion, they called it feigned. If I remained stoic, they named it callousness. I realized then a terrible truth as emperor. I would always be suspected, always be misunderstood. The whispers would never cease, only change their content as circumstances demanded. After Piso, I began my withdrawal. Why expose myself to a public that had already judged me? Why defend against accusations that would multiply regardless of evidence? I found solace in solitude, protection in distance. Capri beckoned with its cliffs and sea walls, a fortress against Rome's poisonous tongues. Let them hate me, I thought. Their hatred was safer than their false love, their suspicion more honest than their fickle adoration. I began my reign with such hopes for the Senate. After Augustus's firm hand, I genuinely wished to restore their dignity and purpose. Take up your responsibilities, I urged them. Rome needs your wisdom. How naive I was. In those early sessions, I waited for them to show initiative, to debate vigorously as in the old republic. Instead, they watched me, studied my face for clues, waiting for commands I refused to give. The Senate sessions became unbearable theater. Once I deliberately presented a problem with no clear solution, hoping for honest counsel. The chamber fell silent until Asinius Gallus, ever the weather vane, finally spoke, offering not his own opinion but what he thought I wanted to hear. Others followed, each more obsequious than the last. I left the Curia that day with a bitter taste in my mouth. By my 7th year as princeps, my patience had worn thin. During one particularly fawning speech, I could contain myself no longer. "O men ready for slavery," I exclaimed. The chamber froze in shock. I saw hurt, fear, and, most damning, recognition in their eyes. They knew their servility, yet continued the charade of republican governance while begging for imperial favor. We were all trapped in Augustus's gilded cage. The fundamental contradiction of my position became unbearable. I was expected to maintain the fiction of restored republic while wielding absolute power. Speak freely, I would say, knowing no one dared. When I refused to guide them, they accused me of deception. When I stated my preferences clearly, they called me a tyrant. There was no path to the partnership I had envisioned. I began sending letters rather than attending Senate meetings. Why subject myself to the empty ritual? My words on parchment carried the same weight as my presence, without requiring me to witness their performance of independence before inevitably bending to my will. Sejanus proved useful here, handling the daily business I increasingly avoided. The senators feared him more than they respected me. Perhaps that was fitting. Looking back, I see how we poisoned each other, the Senate and I. They resented my power while craving my favor. I despised their servility while demanding their obedience. Neither of us could acknowledge the truth, that the Republic was dead, and we were merely actors in an elaborate funeral procession that never ended. Perhaps that is why Capri called to me. There, at least, I could stop pretending. As Rome's affairs grew more complex, I found myself increasingly drawn to Sejanus. His efficiency astounded me. Unlike the fawning senators who offered only flattery, Sejanus provided solutions. When problems arose with the eastern provinces, he presented clear options while others dithered. His humble origins bothered some patricians, but I valued competence over bloodlines. In him, I discovered what had become rare in Rome: genuine loyalty. Sejanus's brilliance shone when he consolidated the Praetorian Guard into a single camp near Rome. For efficiency, he claimed, and I agreed. The scattered cohorts had been ineffective, but united, they became a formidable force. Some senators whispered concerns about armed men so close to the city, but I dismissed them. Rome needed protection, and I needed men I could trust. Sejanus understood what others didn't. Security required strength, not just tradition. My relationship with Agrippina deteriorated beyond repair. Her sons, Germanicus's boys, grew more popular while she barely concealed her contempt for me. Sejanus alone understood my fears. "They plot against you," he warned, bringing evidence of their seditious words. When the Senate convened, I noticed how certain senators gravitated toward her faction. My commander became my only confidant, the sole person who seemed to grasp the dangers surrounding me. When my son Drusus died in 23 CE, something broke within me. I withdrew into grief while Rome continued its demands. Sejanus stepped forward, handling matters I couldn't face. The Senate, the petitioners, and the endless ceremonies. He managed them all. I barely noticed how he positioned his allies in key posts. My suspicion of others had always been my shield, yet with Sejanus, I lowered it. Perhaps that was my gravest error. Rome suffocated me with its politics and pretense. I yearned for escape, and Campania called with its peaceful shores. "The empire can be governed from anywhere," Sejanus assured me. First for weeks, then months, I retreated from the capital, leaving him as my voice in the Senate. Reports came daily, but filtered through his perspective. The distance felt liberating. On Capri, surrounded by sea rather than schemers, I could finally breathe. I recognized the danger in elevating Sejanus so high. No emperor before me had granted such authority to someone outside the imperial family. Yet he filled a void no one else could. Son, advisor, protector, friend. The nobles resented him, of course. A man of equestrian rank commanding such power offended their sensibilities, but their resentment only confirmed my choice. As I watched him rise, a question lingered in my mind: how high would his ambition reach? I made my final departure from Rome in the spring of 26 CE, setting sail for Capri with a sense of profound relief. At 67 years of age, after decades of service to an ungrateful empire, I claimed this island sanctuary as my own. The journey across the Bay of Naples felt like crossing a threshold between two worlds, leaving behind the suffocating politics of Rome for the promise of peace that rose before me, limestone cliffs gleaming white against the azure sea. Capri seduced me with its raw, untamed beauty. I spent my first weeks exploring its dramatic cliffs that plunged hundreds of feet into crystalline waters. The Blue Grotto enchanted me, a sea cave where sunlight filtered through underwater openings, illuminating the chamber with an otherworldly blue glow. The mild climate soothed my aging bones, while panoramic views of the entire Bay of Naples reminded me that Rome remained within reach, yet comfortably distant. I established a modest court on the island, bringing only those I trusted. Sejanus remained in Rome as my eyes and ears, sending daily dispatches and handling routine affairs of state. My withdrawal was practical. I maintained my authority through letters and messengers while freeing myself from the constant performance required in the capital. No more endless ceremonies. No more pretending to enjoy the crude spectacles that please the mob. I commissioned 12 villas across the island, each with its own character. Villa Jovis, perched on the eastern promontory, became my primary residence and administrative center. Another I dedicated to scholarly pursuits, with an extensive library of Greek texts. A third housed my astronomical instruments, where I observed the heavens with my astrologer Thrasyllus. Each villa offered different views, different moods. A private empire where I controlled who entered my presence. My daily routine on Capri brought me contentment that had eluded me for decades. I rose with the sun for a morning swim in a private cove, the salt water invigorating my aged frame. Afternoons I devoted to governance, reviewing reports and dictating responses. Evenings belonged to intellectual discourse with the Greek philosophers and scientists I invited to my sanctuary. We debated ancient texts, discussed astronomical observations, and explored mythological variants. Conversations worthy of an emperor's mind. I recognized the whispers that followed my retreat. Accusations of abandoning my duty, rumors of debauchery that grew more outlandish with each retelling. Yet after 50 years of service to Rome, did I not deserve some measure of peace? Capri was both my sanctuary and my prison. It protected me from enemies, but removed me from direct power. As I watched the sunset from Villa Jovis, I wondered if this isolation would be my legacy's undoing. Governing from Capri proved more effective than I had anticipated. Each morning, messengers arrived with reports from Sejanus and the Senate, bringing Rome to my villa without its endless distractions. I established a strict system: daily dispatches, weekly summaries, and monthly financial accounts. Distance provided clarity. When the Gallic provinces requested tax relief after poor harvests, I studied the facts without senators whispering contradictory advice in my ears. My written directives carried the same weight as if delivered in person. I appointed Poppaeus Sabinus to govern Moesia from my island desk, deployed 3 legions to secure the Germanic frontier, and allocated funds for the aqueduct repairs, all without setting foot in the Senate. The distance stripped away the theater of politics. No longer did I waste hours enduring sycophantic speeches or watching senators' faces for signs of disloyalty. Sejanus proved invaluable as my representative in Rome. He filtered information, presenting me with organized reports rather than chaotic complaints. I trusted his judgment on day-to-day matters while reserving final authority on significant decisions. When the Senate debated the punishment for Votinus Montanus's treasonous speech, Sejanus presented both arguments, allowing me to render judgment without the Senate's emotional appeals clouding my reasoning. Yet rumors flourished in my absence. I received reports of Romans whispering that I had become incapacitated or had surrendered to depraved indulgences on my private island. Such gossip irritated me deeply. While I swam daily in my cliff-top pool and dined on fresh fish, I worked longer hours than ever before. The very distance that improved my governance fed the public suspicion and uncertainty. The greatest challenge of ruling from afar was determining who truly spoke for Rome. When conflicting reports arrived about unrest in Judea, I struggled to discern reality from exaggeration. Sejanus's account differed from the provincial governors, while the Jewish representatives in Rome sent their own version. Without witnessing the testimonies personally, I relied increasingly on Sejanus to be my eyes and ears, a dependency that would prove problematic. My island governance created a paradox I failed to recognize until too late. In seeking to rule more effectively by removing myself from Rome's petty politics, I had created a vacuum others eagerly filled. Information reached me only through filters I couldn't fully control. As years passed, my picture of Rome grew increasingly distorted, like viewing the city through rippling water. I had gained tranquility but sacrificed direct knowledge, a trade that carried unforeseen consequences. The whispers began as mere ripples from the mainland, but soon grew into a tempest of slander. I first heard of the tales from Sejanus, reports of debauchery and perversion supposedly occurring within my villa walls. At first, I laughed. Did Rome truly believe that I, at my age, with my aching joints and weary mind, had transformed into some mythological satyr, hosting nightly orgies beneath the Capri moon? The accusations grew more elaborate with each passing month. According to Rome's gossips, I had become a monster of unprecedented appetites. They spoke of children trained for unspeakable acts, of swimmers dispatched in my private grotto, of elaborate tortures devised for my amusement. My enemies painted me as a creature of such creative depravity that I almost admired their imagination, if not their purpose. The truth was far more mundane. I sought Capri for its beauty, its isolation, and the peace denied me in Rome. Yes, I indulged in wine more freely than perhaps befitted an emperor. Yes, I surrounded myself with scholars and astrologers rather than sycophantic senators. And yes, I had grown eccentric with age, preferring the company of my fish to most humans. But a depraved monster? Such accusations revealed more about Rome than about me. I refused to dignify these slanders with denials. What purpose would it serve? Those determined to believe the worst would continue regardless of my protests. This silence, I now recognize, was perhaps my greatest mistake. In the vacuum of truth, lies flourished like weeds in an abandoned garden. My retreat from public life created the perfect canvas for my enemies to paint their monstrous portrait. The political utility of these rumors was obvious. By portraying me as morally corrupt, my opponents undermined my authority without the inconvenience of open rebellion. Each whispered tale of depravity served to justify resistance to my policies, emboldening the Senate to obstruct my will while claiming to protect Rome's virtue from its degenerate emperor. The hypocrisy was breathtaking in its audacity. Perhaps most bitter is the knowledge that these fabrications will outlive any truth. Future generations will remember not my decades of loyal service, not the peace and prosperity of my reign, but the monstrous caricature crafted by Tacitus and his kind. In seeking solitude, I gifted my enemies the freedom to destroy my legacy. The final irony of my life, that in escaping Rome's corruption, I only confirmed my deepest suspicions about the darkness of human nature. It began so subtly. From my villa on Capri, I watched as Sejanus's shadow grew longer across Rome. Reports reached me of his daily activities, his meetings, his recommendations. At first, I welcomed his diligence. Then came the whispers about Agrippina's sons. Nero Caesar, then Drusus, both accused of treason against me. The evidence always provided by Sejanus, always compelling. I noted how these accusations conveniently removed Germanicus's heirs from the line of succession. Sejanus's request to marry Livilla startled me from complacency. My niece, widow of my own son Drusus, this union would bind him to the imperial family. I delayed my answer, claiming concern for public opinion. His face betrayed nothing, but his eyes, those ambitious eyes, flickered with impatience. I recognized that look. I had worn it myself when Augustus hesitated to name me his successor. That night, I penned orders to my network of informants, watch him closer. Rome itself seemed to bow before him. Statues of Sejanus appeared in the forum, in theaters, even beside my own. The Senate voted him honors previously reserved for emperors. They offered public prayers for his health alongside mine. My spies reported citizens calling him Tiberius's partner in labor. Partner. No, I had created a rival. The prefect who commanded the praetorians now commanded Rome's respect. My absence had created a vacuum he eagerly filled. I tested him with contradictory instructions. Permission granted, then rescinded. Policies approved, then reversed. A loyal servant would have sought clarification. Sejanus, instead, chose whichever version advanced his interests. More telling were the omissions. Reports from Syria mentioned disturbances he never relayed. Letters from loyal senators never reached me. I began sending duplicate correspondence through separate channels, discovering how much he filtered from my view. The irony did not escape me. I had elevated Sejanus to escape the burdens of rule, only to find myself laboring twice as hard to monitor him. My own creation had become my greatest threat. Each night I retired to my chambers exhausted from this shadow game. I, who had commanded legions, now commanded only my suspicions. My island retreat had become both my sanctuary and my prison, with Sejanus controlling the waters between. I had learned patience from Augustus. Sejanus would learn it from me, though his lesson would end differently. I began composing a letter to the Senate, choosing each word with deliberate care. I would strike when he felt most secure, when he believed himself practically emperor already. My hand trembled not with fear, but anticipation. The game between us would end soon, and only one of us would survive it. I had not ruled Rome this long by being the lesser player. I had watched Sejanus grow too powerful, his tendrils reaching into every corner of Rome. The Praetorian Guard answered to him, not me. His supporters filled the Senate. I knew then he must fall, but with surgical precision. A direct move would trigger civil war. I began sending contradictory messages one day honoring him with a statue, the next criticizing him publicly. His confidence wavered. I saw confusion in his eyes. Macro proved invaluable, willing to betray his commander for the promise of becoming the next Praetorian prefect. Antonia, my brother's widow, risked everything to send me evidence of Sejanus's treachery. The evidence suggested he had poisoned my son Drusus years before. My grief turned to cold rage. I spent sleepless nights planning his destruction, knowing I would have only one chance. The Senate meeting was my masterpiece of deception. I sent a lengthy letter, carefully crafted. It began with praise for Sejanus, lulling him into false security. The senators congratulated him prematurely. Then came the subtle accusations building to outright condemnation. I wish I could have seen his face as the words transformed him from Rome's second man to its most reviled traitor. They seized him there, in the Senate house. The man who had made others tremble now shook with fear. By nightfall he was dead, his body thrown to the mob. They tore it to pieces and dragged the remains through the streets. The same crowd that had honored him that morning now celebrated his destruction. Such is the loyalty of the masses, as changeable as the wind and just as substantial. What followed was necessary, but terrible. His children could not be allowed to live. They would become rallying points for rebellion. His youngest daughter. I cannot write what they did to circumvent the law against executing virgins. His supporters were hunted down, their names struck from records, their property seized. I ordered his statues destroyed, his name chiseled from monuments. Rome would forget he ever existed. The conspiracy ran deeper than I imagined. Names of plotters filled scroll after scroll. Men I had trusted, families I had honored. And the revelation that he likely murdered my son. It poisoned what remained of my faith in humanity. I retreated further into Capri, surrounded by fewer servants, trusting almost no one. I had won, but victory tasted of ashes and blood. The blood of Rome flowed freely after Sejanus's fall. I watched from Capri as the Senate, those same men who had erected statues to my former prefect, now scrambled to condemn him and anyone associated with him. Their hypocrisy disgusted me. "Let all of Sejanus's friends be executed," they cried, though yesterday they had called themselves his dearest companions. I once valued justice above all. Now I found myself signing death warrants with barely a glance. The treason trials multiplied like a disease. Accusations flew between noble houses that had stood for centuries. I received reports of entire families choosing suicide over the shame of public execution. Their blood was on my hands, yet I felt nothing but cold necessity. The delators, my informers, grew fat on the estates of the condemned. Men I had once respected now whispered poison about their neighbors, hoping to claim their wealth. Macro, Sejanus's replacement, proved even more efficient at rooting out traitors. When Senator Cotta Messallinus was accused, I intervened, not from mercy, but because he had merely been a fool, not a conspirator. The condemned should be given 10 days before execution, I had once decreed. Now, bodies were thrown into the Tiber the same day sentences were passed. I received word that Sejanus's young children had been executed, the girl so young that she did not understand her fate. When told what was to happen, she kept asking what she had done wrong, promising never to do it again. I dreamed of Marcus Terentius that night. He alone had dared defend his friendship with Sejanus in the Senate, saying, "It is not for us to judge whom the emperor favors." For his courage, I spared him when others called for his death. But one act of mercy amid an ocean of blood meant nothing. Rome had become a city where men feared their own shadows. By the 3rd year after Sejanus's fall, the purges began to slow. Not from any mercy in my heart, but because there were simply fewer targets remaining. I had become the very tyrant I once despised. I, who had studied philosophy and valued justice, had created a machine of death that operated on suspicion alone. The Republic was truly dead, and I had helped bury it. I look at my withered hands now, spotted with age, and wonder how these same hands signed so many death warrants for my own blood. 77 years I have walked this earth, and what remains of the family Augustus entrusted to me? A graveyard of names. Agrippina, Germanicus's widow, starved herself to death last year after enduring exile on that barren rock. Her final act of defiance against me, perhaps the only choice left to her. Her sons, Nero and Drusus Caesar, preceded her to the underworld, both perishing in captivity. Nero on Pontia, Drusus in a cell beneath the imperial palace. I was told he resorted to eating the stuffing from his mattress before the end. Was this justice for their conspiracies? Or was I merely the instrument of Sejanus's ambitions? The line between protection of Rome and personal vengeance has blurred with each passing year. Sejanus. Even in death his shadow stretches across my reign. He turned me against my own, whispering of plots and treasons. I believed him, gods help me. When his own conspiracy was revealed, I executed him and his followers with a fury that shocked even myself. But by then, how many innocent family members had already fallen? The truth died with him, leaving me only with doubt. My grandson, Tiberius Gemellus, visits me occasionally, his eyes always watchful, afraid. The boy is my blood, yet there is no warmth between us. And then there is Caligula, my grandnephew, who now lives with me on this island. He smiles too readily, laughs too loudly at my jests. Behind those eyes, I sense something disturbing. Yet he is Augustus's last male descendant besides the boy. The principate will likely fall to him. I am the last of my generation. My brother Drusus, my nephew Germanicus, my son Drusus, all long dead. Even my detractors in the Senate have mostly preceded me to the grave. I rule surrounded by men who never knew the Republic, who never fought beside Augustus to bring peace to a fractured world. They see only an old man clinging to power on a remote island, suspicious of shadows. Augustus built this dynasty to prevent Rome from tearing itself apart again. He entrusted me with his life's work, his family, his legacy. Yet, under my hand, that family has withered like autumn leaves. Where there should have been a strong tree of descendants, there are only scattered survivors, bound by blood but divided by suspicion. This, I fear, will be remembered as my greatest failure. Not the wars unwon, but the peace unmade within my own house. My legacy lies not in marble monuments, but in ledgers and accounts. While gossip spread tales of my supposed depravities on Capri, I transformed the imperial treasury. Through careful management and restraint, I amassed a surplus of 2.7 billion sesterces, a fortune that later emperors would squander on vanities. They called me miserly. I called it prudence. The empire's foundation is not glory, but gold properly spent. Unlike my predecessors who sought glory and conquest, I preferred the quiet victory of diplomacy. Why spill Roman blood when words and strategic positioning could achieve the same ends? I maintained strong borders without emptying our coffers on foreign adventures. The Senate mocked my restraint, but the soldiers' mothers thanked me silently. War makes for better poetry than peace, but peace makes for better lives. My greatest triumph was in provincial governance. I selected administrators for competence, not connections, and kept them in post for years, sometimes decades. A good shepherd shears his sheep, not flays them, I told my governors. The provinces flourished under this stability. No rebellions, no famines, no chaos. Just the quiet prosperity that historians find too dull to record. Rome's true strength lay in well-managed territories, not spectacles. The Pax Romana that Augustus began, I preserved and strengthened. For 23 years, most Romans lived in peace, a remarkable achievement forgotten by those who preferred scandal to substance. I built aqueducts in crumbling cities, sent relief after earthquakes devastated Asia Minor, and reformed tax collection to eliminate the worst abuses. The common people benefited. though they never connected their improved circumstances to my policies. My fiscal reforms never earned the adoration given to those who squandered wealth on games and spectacles. I refused to debase the currency or impose ruinous taxes when emergencies struck. Instead, I built reserves, planned carefully. When Sejanus's treachery was revealed, the empire's administration continued without disruption, a testament to the systems I had established. Stability is invisible until it's gone. History, I knew, would remember my personal failings rather than my public service. The irony does not escape me. My greatest successes were precisely those qualities Romans valued least. While they craved spectacle and conquest, I gave them balanced budgets and stable borders. Yet the administrative precedents I established served Rome well for generations. Perhaps that is legacy enough for a reluctant emperor who never sought the throne. The visitors grew fewer with each passing season. Rome seemed to forget me in my exile, though I had never truly left my post. At 80, my body betrayed me more each day, but my mind remained sharp, perhaps too sharp. I found myself increasingly alone with the ghosts of my past Drusus, my beloved brother, my son taken too soon, and Germanicus, whose shadow loomed larger in death than in life. My mother Livia, 3 years in her grave, visited me most often. In dreams, she still commanded, still schemed, still pushed me toward greatness I never wanted. Even Sejanus appeared, laughing at how I continued to fear his influence from beyond the grave. I would wake drenched in sweat, reaching for my dagger, only to find myself alone in my chambers, surrounded by guards who protected me from everyone but my memories. I sought answers in the stars. Thrasyllus had taught me well before his passing, and I spent hours charting celestial movements, seeking patterns that might explain the chaos of my existence. Greek philosophers became my companions, Epicurus and Zeno, offering more comfort than any living courtier. Death approached, and I wished to meet it with understanding, if not peace. Reports from Rome arrived daily, but I found myself caring less about Senate proceedings and more about questions no emperor before me had dared ask aloud. What was the purpose of power? Had the gods guided my path, or had I merely stumbled through the dark? Justice, fate, legacy, these consumed my thoughts as the empire's daily concerns receded like the tide from Capri's shores. My body failed me more each day. My once straight soldier's posture bent like a storm-weathered tree. Ulcers covered my face, requiring medicinal patches that only fueled the monstrous rumors about me. I heard the whispers of my servants, saw how they averted their eyes. The man who had commanded legions now struggled to command his own limbs, yet in this decline I found a strange clarity. Capri had become both my prison and my sanctuary. Here, away from Rome's perpetual performance, I finally saw the patterns of my life with terrible clarity. All my compromises, my reluctant cruelties, my desperate attempts to preserve Augustus's legacy, what had they amounted to? I had survived them all, rivals, friends, family. But survival, I finally understood, was not the same as living, and I had not truly lived since the day I became princeps. After executing Agrippina and her sons, I summoned young Caligula to Capri. A mercy, I told myself, sparing Germanicus's last son. The boy arrived with perfect composure, showing no grief for his mother and brothers. I watched him bow before me, his movements precise, his eyes calculating. He thanked me for my generosity with such convincing sincerity that even I, who trusted no one, almost believed him. Living in close quarters revealed Caligula's true nature. He possessed an uncanny gift for mimicry, adopting whatever persona pleased his audience. With me he played the devoted grandnephew, with the guards, the soldier's companion, with the senators who visited, the humble student of governance. Yet I caught glimpses behind his mask, a flash of cruelty in his eyes when a servant dropped a cup, the slight curl of his lip at news of a senator's death. One night I discovered him in the gardens, methodically breaking the wings of a captured bird, studying its movements with detached fascination. When he noticed me, he smiled and said, "I'm learning how pain changes behavior, Uncle. Useful knowledge for ruling men, wouldn't you agree?" I recognized something in him then, something worse than the cruelty I had known in others. His was a cold, experimental malice. "I am nursing a viper for Rome's bosom," I confided to Macro after witnessing Caligula's perfect performance before visiting dignitaries. "He will make me seem kind by comparison." Macro laughed, thinking it mere cynicism. He didn't see what I saw, the hollowness behind Caligula's eyes, the absence of any principle beyond self-gratification. The boy wore virtue like a costume, discarding it when unobserved. My dilemma grew as his time on Capri lengthened. Dynastic politics demanded I favor him, Germanicus's last son, over my own grandson Gemellus. Yet Gemellus, though younger and less brilliant, possessed basic decency Caligula lacked. I watched them together once. Caligula teaching Gemellus a game, patient and charming. Later that same day I overheard him mocking the boy's simplicity to a companion. The contrast chilled me. In the end, I chose compromise, naming both Caligula and Gemellus as heirs. A coward's solution. As I dictated my will, I knew Caligula would never share power. I saw Rome's future in his eyes when the announcement was made. Calculation, not gratitude. "He will destroy Gemellus and anyone else who stands in his way," I told Macro. "But Rome survived Augustus. Rome survived me. Rome will survive him too." My final failure was this lack of courage to prevent what I clearly foresaw. Rumors reached me even in Capri, whispers of plots in Rome, Caligula's growing ambitions. At 77, my sanctuary had become a prison of isolation. The gods themselves seemed to whisper that it was time to leave. I ordered preparations for departure, knowing this journey might be my last. My physicians advised against it, but what emperor heeds caution when destiny calls? I would face Rome one final time, not cowering on my island retreat. The journey north proved agonizing. Each mile along the Campanian coast drained what little strength remained in my aged frame. We traveled slowly, stopping frequently when my breathing faltered. The retinue watched me with vulture's eyes, not out of concern, but calculating the moment of my demise. Even Macro, my Praetorian prefect, seemed to drift between attendance to me and deference to Caligula. The boy himself maintained a performance of devotion that fooled no one. We reached my villa at Misenum as winter gave way to spring. The Bay of Naples spread before us like a silver plate, beautiful and indifferent to human suffering. That night, fever seized me with merciless hands. I collapsed during dinner, my consciousness fleeing like a startled bird. They thought me dead. I learned later that messengers had already raced to Rome announcing Caligula's succession. The celebrations had begun before my heart had stopped. I awoke to the sounds of looting. My own villa being stripped of imperial insignia, servants already wearing Caligula's colors. Through half-closed eyes, I watched my chosen successor strutting about, distributing my possessions like a triumphant general. The signet ring I had given him now used to seal orders as if I were already ash. How amusing. This final betrayal confirmed everything I had come to believe about the faithlessness of men. Rome would learn what manner of snake I had nurtured. The shock of my revival spread terror through the villa. Caligula's face, I shall never forget it, transformed from confident ruler to frightened boy in an instant. That night, as I drifted between consciousness and shadow, I felt rather than saw someone enter my chambers. A pillow pressed against my face with surprising strength. Was it Macro, Caligula himself? The darkness took me before I could know. How fitting that I, accused of countless murders, should meet my end through such means. In my final moments, a strange peace descended. The gods had granted me one last vindication, to witness the true nature of those I'd surrounded myself with. Rome would remember me as cruel and paranoid, never knowing how justified my suspicions had been. History would judge me harshly, but I departed with the cold comfort of being right. The republic I had pretended to preserve died with Augustus. With me died any pretense that Rome was governed by anything but naked ambition and treachery. I often wondered how history would remember me. Now, as I dictate these final thoughts, I know the answer. They carried my body from Misenum with little ceremony. The people neither mourned nor celebrated. Some called for my corpse to be thrown into the Tiber, the ultimate dishonor. The Senate, those cowards who flattered me to my face, refused my deification. How quickly they revealed their true feelings once I could no longer punish them. Caligula, my chosen successor, delivered a funeral oration praising my virtues. I knew it for the performance it was. Within months, he mocked me openly, claiming I was senile and unfit to rule. He undid my policies and squandered the treasury I had so carefully maintained. The boy I raised would become my first detractor, ensuring my memory would be tarnished from the start. I have no illusions about what historians will write. They will call me a monster who indulged in unspeakable vices on Capri. They will recount every execution as evidence of my cruelty, ignoring the treachery that necessitated such measures. The scandals will eclipse my achievements. The stable provinces, the full treasury, the decades of peace. Such is the fate of emperors who are neither loved nor understood. Perhaps one day they will recognize my true legacy. When Caligula's madness brings chaos, they may look back on my reign with newfound appreciation. They might acknowledge that I never wanted the purple robe Augustus thrust upon me, that I served from duty, not ambition, that I maintained the laws and borders of Rome with competence, if not with charm. I accept my portion of blame. My retreat to Capri was a mistake. I grew suspicious, perhaps paranoid after Sejanus's betrayal. I allowed Macro too much power in my later years. I executed some who may have been innocent, spared others who deserved punishment. but I was never the depraved tyrant they will paint me to be. I was a man, flawed and bitter, but not the monster of legend. What will history say of Tiberius Caesar? That I was cruel, reclusive, perverse, that I was Augustus's pale shadow. They will remember the failures, not the 23 years of stable governance. So be it. I go to my ancestors knowing the truth of my life. Neither the hero Rome wanted, nor the villain history will remember. I was simply the man who bore the weight of empire until it crushed whatever was good in me. My death brought a wave of relief across Rome. I felt it even as my spirit departed my aged body. The people celebrated in the streets, though some feared I might return, how amusing their superstitions. They stabbed my corpse to ensure I was truly gone. Meanwhile, my grandnephew Caligula, whom I had chosen as successor, smiled at my funeral with barely concealed excitement. At first, Rome adored him. Caligula released prisoners, recalled exiles, and burned my treason trials records in a grand display. He distributed my hoarded wealth to the praetorians and public. I had spent decades carefully building the treasury, and he squandered it in months. The Senate praised him as the dawn of a new era, while my policies crumbled like dust. The transformation was swift. Within 6 months, the charming boy I had known became unrecognizable. After recovering from illness, he emerged cruel and erratic. He forced senators to run alongside his chariot for miles, executed nobles on whims, and claimed divinity. I may have been severe, but I never declared myself a god. His madness knew no bounds. My military conquests were abandoned for his theatrical campaigns. He marched legions to the northern shore, ordered them to gather seashells as spoils of Neptune, and declared victory over the ocean. The generals who had respected me now exchanged worried glances. The legions that once stood as Rome's shield became his personal playthings. His extravagance knew no limits. He built a bridge of boats across the Bay of Baiae to disprove a prophecy. He constructed a floating palace on Lake Nemi. My villas, once models of tasteful restraint, were transformed into gaudy monuments to excess. The treasury I had filled dwindled daily, while he bathed in perfumes and drank pearls dissolved in vinegar. I watch now as conspirators whisper in corners. The praetorians grow restless. Even Caligula senses the danger, but his paranoia only feeds his cruelty. He has undone in 4 years what took me decades to build. Rome's foundations tremble under his madness. Soon, I sense, his blood will stain palace floors, and another will inherit the purple I once wore.